put that there. There we go. So Milton begins this by stating that his subject is going to be Adam and Eve's disobedience and fall from grace. He makes a kind of an appeal to the muse, which is a Greek thing, but in this case he invokes a heavenly muse, and he asks for God's help in relating the plan accurately, right? So instead of using the muses of Greek mythology, he basically turns God into his muse by requesting his influence. So, as I said, the action begins with Satan and his fellow rebel angels. They're chained in a lake of fire in hell. They free themselves, they create pandemonium, and they come up with this plan of, we're not going to fight God and his angels anymore because we can't win. So what we're going to do is we're going to corrupt God's favorite creation, which is mankind. We're going to go after that. We're going to find his weak spot. We're going to go after him, right? So that's what we're going to do. Pal 33322, thank you for the follow. So as they decide to do this, right? Satan steps up and says, "I'll be the one to do it," because he wants, one, he wants the job done right, and two, it will be his kind of coup de grace on God and his realm of heaven, right? So he decides he's gonna, as he prepares to leave hell, he's met at the gates by his children of sin and death. We talked about, and they build a bridge to between hell and earth, right? So we talked about the Holy Trinity, and it takes three separate beings to do what God did all by himself as a three-in-one God, right? So there's an important distinction there between the Holy Trinity and unholy Trinity. In heaven at this time, God orders the angels to form a council. He tells them of Satan's intentions to corrupt mankind, and the Son, God the Son, volunteers himself to become the sacrifice to redeem mankind, right? So at that time, during this, Satan travels through night and chaos and finds earth. He disguises himself as a cherub to get past Uriel, right? And who stands guard at the sun. He tells Uriel he wishes to see and praise God's glorious creation. And he is then allowed to go to earth. As he reaches earth, when he sees the splendor of paradise and the Garden of Eden, it brings him physical pain, right, rather than pleasure. And so because it's a reminder that he is outside of God's grace, right, and it causes him physical pain. So he decides this is what he needs to do, right? And so he leaps over Paradise's wall, takes the form of a cormorant, which is, as I said, is a large bird, and perches himself atop the tree of life, right? So from his post, he looks around, and he's gauging Adam and Eve. Uriel sees him and notices the emotions that are kind of conflicting within Satan. And so he calls down to the other angels and tells them that there's an imposter within the garden, and so they begin searching, right? Adam and Eve are working in the garden, obeying all the rules of God. When they finish their long day of work, they return and they're going to rest. Satan takes the form of a toad at that point, and he whispers into Eve's ear as she sleeps, right? During that time, Gabriel finds Satan, orders him to leave paradise, and Satan prepares to battle Gabriel, but God causes a sign to appear in the sky, which is the golden scales of justice, and Satan runs away, right? Eve awakes and tells Adam about a dream that she had where she was an angel tempted her to eat from the forbidden tree. So God then sends down Raphael to warn Adam and Eve of the dangers of that they face playing around with Satan. So When Raphael arrives, he relates the story of Satan's envy. Let me see. Scoot through this. Adam asks Raphael to tell him the story of creation during this, and Raphael tells him that God sent the sun into chaos to create the universe. He created the earth, the stars, and the planets, and then Adam asks Raphael about the movement of the stars and the planets, which is indicative of the time that we're looking at, right? The Renaissance and whatnot. Eve retires, allowing Raphael and Adam to speak alone, and then Raphael promptly warns Adam about his unquenchable search for knowledge. Okay, he tells him, this is where he tells him that he'll learn all he needs to know, and that all other knowledge is not meant for human to comprehend. Right. So this is the reaffirmation, right, of the church's teachings that if it's not in the Bible, you don't need to know it. Right. So just sit down now, which is funny, right? Because Milton is writing something that's not in the Bible, right? And it's a convenient way for him to reaffirm, I don't know, right? And so Adam then tells Raphael about his first memories of him waking up, wondering who he is, where he is, what he was, right? And then God spoke to him lots of things, and tells him, this is who you are, and that kind of stuff. And this is where Adam expresses his intense lust or desire for Eve. And Raphael reminds him that he should love God more than he loves Eve, right? And then he leaves. So Satan, after 8 days of banishment, right, he chooses to take the form of a serpent, right? And Eve at this time suggests that they should work separately from one another. Convenient, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, right? And it's, Eve suggested it, so it's her fault. So when they separate and they're working, Satan searches for Eve, and he finds her working alone. He talks to her, right? Compliments her on her beauty and her godliness and all that stuff, flatters the shit out of her, right? And she's amazed to find an animal that can speak, which you would be too, right? Right? If you haven't seen the meme that's floating around, right, about if one day your dog looks at you and says, "No one's going to believe you," and then it never speaks again, right? Kind of the same thing, right? She asked the snake, right, "How did you learn to speak?" Right? And the serpent tells her, "I learned by eating from this tree, the tree of knowledge," right? And then he tricks her by saying that God actually wants you to eat from this tree. This is a test of courage, not one of obedience, right? And so she then eats of the fruit, and she immediately realizes that she's made a mistake, right? So she runs off to find Adam, who's making a wreath of flowers, and as soon as he sees her, he knows, because everything about her has changed, right? Her demeanor, her posture, all of that has changed, right? And so he decides at that point that he would rather be fallen with her than remain pure and lose her, right? So he eats of the tree, and God immediately knows of their disobedience. He tells the angels in heaven that Adam and Eve must be punished, but with a display of both justice and mercy, right? So he sends the sun to give out the punishments. The sun punishes the serpent, and he condemns it to never walk upright again, right? That whole bit about "you shall eat of the dust of the earth," right? And you will strike at the heel of man for all eternity. Then the sun tells Adam and Eve that they must now suffer pain and death, right? That they no longer have eternal life, that they will suffer pain, illness, and death. Eve and all women must suffer the pain of childbirth and must submit to their husbands. And Adam and all men must hunt and grow their own food on a depleted earth. So they no longer have paradise where everything's readily there and provided for them. They now have to toil, they have to plant and tend their crops and raise animals and all this stuff, right? Meanwhile, Satan returns to hell. He's greeted with cheers, right? And he speaks to the devils in pandemonium, and they all believe that he's defeated God, that he has absolutely shown God that there's nothing that he can do that Satan can't undo, right? Which is really not the same as defeating him, right? So sin and death travel the bridge they built on their way to earth. And then the devils unwillingly transform into snakes, right? And they try to, they're transformed into snakes for their deception. And they try to reach fruit from imaginary trees that shrivel and turn to dust as they reach them, right? If you, this is directly taken from a Greek myth of Tantalus. There's the Tantalus myth, right? He offended the gods and was punished by everlasting thirst and hunger in Hades. So he was placed to stand underneath fruit trees that were barely out of reach, and water up to his chin, and every time he went to drink the water, it would recede from him. And so that was his plight, right? Because he offended the gods. So this is what the devils are kind of given, right? So God tells the angels to transform the earth. We now have to have hot and cold seasons, right? So instead of consistent temperatures all the time. Adam and Eve fear their approaching death, right? They begin to become aware of their mortality, which is terrifying. This is what's called an epiphany, right? They have this epiphany, this moment of epiphany, where they have a revelation, after which they never view life the same way again. So we all have these going through our lives. The first time we realize that we're going to die, right? That's an epiphany, right? We're not born with that knowledge. We're not born with that revelation. The first time we experience death of a loved one or a pet or something of that nature, that's an epiphany within our lives, because we never see life the same way again, because we have that pain. This is what they're experiencing. They're realizing their own mortality, right? Which they've never felt before. So this is a fear. So they begin to blame each other for their obedience, much like people are doing right now, right? And become increasingly angry at one another, right? They're fucking, they're fighting and whatnot. So in a fit of rage, Adam wonders why God ever even created Eve, right? And he wants to just go away. He just like, I'd be better off without her. And then Eve begs Adam not to abandon her, right? And she tells him that they can survive by loving one another. She accepts unto herself, right? The blame, right, of disobeying both Adam and God. And then she starts thinking about killing herself, right? She believes that she should die. She doesn't deserve to live. And then Adam, because he's reminded through her speech of his love for her, right, forbids her from taking her own life. That'd be fantastic if that worked for everyone, right? He remembers their punishment, and then he decides that what they're going to do, right, is they're going to enact revenge on Satan by being obedient to God. So together they pray, they repent, and they rededicate their lives to God. And so God hears their prayers, right, and he sends Michael down to earth, the archangel Michael. Michael comes down, tells them they have to leave paradise. He's the eviction guy, right? He's like, pack your shit, you got to go. But before they leave, right, Michael does this weird thing. He puts Eve to sleep. He's like, sleep, that'd be fantastic, right? I wish somebody would do that to me sometimes. And he takes Adam up on the highest hill he can find, and he shows him a vision of mankind's future. Okay, Adam is depressed. Adam is upset. He is feeling the weight of all of these things upon himself, right? And so he takes him up there. He shows him, right? Adam sees the sin of his children, their children, future children. He sees, Cain slay his brother Abel. He knows it's going to come. He sees his first vision of death through his own son. And he asks Michael if there's any alternative to death. Is there any way around this? And so Michael doesn't really answer. He just continues to show him this slideshow of kind of the Bible on fast forward, if you will. Generations follow. They're afflicted by greed and lust, envy, pride, all these things, right? They kill each other, right? For personal items and just solely for pleasure, right? And then he shows him the vision of Enoch, right? And who is saved by God from his peers who were trying to kill him, right? Because he is a righteous man, right? He also sees the story of Noah and the virtue of that man who allowed his family to survive the flood, right? Adam begins to feel remorse for death and happiness for mankind's redemption. And then the process begins again, and we see the world getting corrupted and corrupted and corrupted. So he shows him Nimrod and the Tower of Babel and how languages became perverted, if you will, through that. He sees Moses and the Israelites, and then finally he sees God the Son, Jesus, willingly be put on a cross, hung there for 3 days, and die, and then be resurrected to purify all mankind of sin, right? To take on the sin of all mankind, so that we have the power of redemption, that we have the gift of grace, right? Grace is by definition, a biblical definition, is a gift that's given but not deserved. So we're all given that gift of grace, right? And so he sees that, and it gives Adam hope, right? He's not as despondent. He's not as defeated. And so Eve wakes up, tells Adam she had this very interesting and educating dream. And then Michael leaves them sad. They're both saddened, but Adam has hope, right? And they leave paradise. They leave the Garden of Eden hand in hand, right, to face the world that they have kind of doomed themselves to, if you will, right? And thus ends Milton's play, or Milton's epic poem, right? So that's the plot in kind of a really quick overview, right? There's some things that are important here that that Milton is reaffirming. One of them is the importance of obedience to God. That's all the way through, right, from beginning to end. Then there's the hierarchical nature of the universe, with heaven above, earth in the middle, and hell below. There's that's working. You have light and dark, good and evil. And then you have this thing that's kind of conversation versus thought, or meditate, however you want to put it, meditation, whatever. But it's important for people to think about the things they're going to say, and it's important for them to think about the things that they have said and things that other people have said to them. And we have to bear witness to all that, and we have to kind of weigh it, right, between the idea of, is it moral, is it just, right, or is it immoral, is it unjust? And we have to sit there and weigh those things, right? And so that's what Milton says. That's his cosmogony his viewpoint of the universe and religion and kind of the hierarchy of his spiritual being is that we are all capable of making those distinctions. We don't need a church to do that. We don't need someone to tell us what's right and wrong. We know what's right and wrong. If you have a question about what's right and wrong, go to the Bible, read it, and you can see it, right? And so that's kind of a reaffirming of his viewpoints, right? So, let me see what else is here. Okay, cool. So also, I want to go back just for my notes. The snakes, right? So think about this for a minute. When the devils are all turned into snakes, right? And they can't eat, they can't drink, right? They're kind of stuck in this kind of Tantalus myth, right? There's a very popular film that kind of purports the same thing, right? And if you think about it, the film that I'm thinking of, right, is one where something is stolen, right, and the people who steal it are then cursed, right, and their food turns to ash in their mouth, right, that nothing has a flavor, there's nothing that can sustain them, right, and then once in the daylight they look like regular people, but in the moonlight they become skeletons, right? So you have Pirates of the Caribbean, right, that has this same type of Tantalus myth, right? And this is exactly what happens to the devils when they're turned into snakes. Instead of being skeletons, they're snakes. In Pirates of the Caribbean, they become skeletons because that's what we would be as humans. So they can't eat anything, nothing slakes their thirst, nothing satisfies their hunger, right? Until they put the world right again, right? Until they collect all of those coins, put them back where they belong, right? That's the story of Pirates of the Caribbean. This is a very, very old motif. It's a very old thing that happens, right? It's been around for a very long time. So that's kind of the story of Milton and Paradise Lost. The story of Paradise Lost was so ubiquitous. So many people had access to it, read it, right? There are people who actually use it as a biblical supplement. They would actually have it sitting on their nightstand with their Bible, and they would have a copy of Paradise Lost. And then later he wrote Paradise Regained. I'm not going through that. You can go read that one if you want to. It's where he tried to kind of fix all the inconsistencies. It's not better than this. But there were so many people who were reading this that what has happened is most of Milton's poem has now become Christian mythos. It's been adopted into Christianity as being this is the story, right? So there's so many different, and none of this, other than the main guidelines of this was created, right? And then you have Adam and Eve and their fall, and then later on we're told a little bit of kind of the fall of Satan and his kind of arrogance. But none of this exists within the Bible, right? But people will say that it does, and they'll argue with you the same way as they'll argue for things like when they say an eye for an eye, right, is a biblical teaching. No, that's actually from the Code of Hammurabi, right, which predates the Bible by about 2,000 years, right? So there's a lot of ideas that are within the Bible that Milton grabs a hold of, and the reason he grabs a hold of them the same way the writers of the Bible grabbed a hold of them is because they are indigenous to the human experience. They're as I said earlier, the word I keep using is ubiquitous, meaning they are applied indiscriminately, right, and everyone can relate to them, right? That's why these stories remain. That's why they remain as literature. It's why they stand the test of time, right? There's actually a documentary on Milton and Paradise Lost. It's an hour and 30 minutes long, right? But there's the link to it. It is the quintessential documentary on Milton. It's boring, right? The guy who's doing the talking is an academic. He is pure academic. He's got a sweater and everything, right? But you can go and watch that if you want more information and whatnot. So if you guys have any questions, anything that you want to ask, if you want to comment on something, please feel free to do so. But that ends my spiel, as it were. Cool. Marker here.